Hello everyone! Welcome to another video. So, the time has finally come. We need to talk about Heartstopper. I've decided to do something a little bit different today. If you follow me on Instagram and if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I love illustration. I've done a few paid illustration commissions and my style is very kind of whimsical and childish and friendly. So I thought it would fit in really well with the vibe and aesthetic of Heartstopper. Since the end of last year, I've been using Procreate on my iPad, which I absolutely love. And I thought about filming myself drawing, but the thing is, it takes me quite a long time to do these drawings, and Procreate has this really cool feature where it records what you're doing as you're drawing it. So what I thought we could do, I thought we could maybe get a little bit technical and do like a split screen, and that way I can talk about Heartstopper while you're seeing me drawing. You can see what I come up with and I won't get distracted because often my mind wanders a bit when I'm drawing and I enter this zone, and I'll be able to properly put my thoughts in order because there is much to talk about. I've been an Alice Oseman fan right from the very beginning, so I can't wait to get into this. Get yourself comfy, grab a nice hot drink, and let's get drawing. So the first thing I do whenever I start drawing is I have a look at reference images. Procreate has this really cool feature where you can do different layers, a bit like Photoshop, and it means that I can import images to kind of trace round and get the anatomy right. I don't know about you, but anatomy is something I've always struggled with. I hate it when people say that tracing is a form of cheating with art, because I really don't think it is, especially if you're learning how to position things, and the more practice you get, the better at art you'll end up being in the end, hopefully. So what I do is I use these images just to kind of help me get my proportions right. So let's talk about Heartstopper. I remember reading Solitaire when it first came out, and I went into a bookshop and they had this little magazine and there was an interview with Alice Oseman, and she had written Solitaire when she was doing her GCSEs, which just blew my tiny mind. And I immediately picked it up. I think I was maybe a little bit young to properly relate to Tori at the time. It's a book I'd really love to go back to and read again, especially now I know more about the Oseman verse and I know about Nick and Charlie, and I love Tori as well. I'm absolutely in the Tori fan club. Oh no, not that, not that Tori fan club. God. Anyway, despite not having fully connected with Solitaire, I immediately connected with Alice Oseman. I've always loved writing stories and books, and Alice did this video, I think it was for World Book Day, where she talked about how to publish your own book, and she was the only person that I'd seen that was a young person that had published something, and she was just someone that I kind of felt I could really look up to at the time. Then comes Heartstopper. I read a few of the webcomics, but I first properly started reading it when the first edition was published, and I immediately fell in love with it. All of the characters really leap off the page, and Alice is somehow able to get all of this expression and personality and even mannerisms and quirks into drawings, which I find pretty amazing. So this is my current Alice Oseman collection. I have had more of them. I've had all of the books at least once, and then some of them I've given away or passed on to friends. But I have to say, my favourites are probably Heartstopper volumes 1 to 3 and Loveless. I absolutely love Loveless. I thought it was really revolutionary. I'd never read anything with an asexual character in before, or anyone ace as far as I knew, and it was just a really lovely story as well. But Heartstopper is definitely something really special. So let's move on to talking about the show. I remember when the open casting call announcement came out on Instagram, and I thought that was really cool because you hardly ever see an open casting call for a massive show, and I think everyone that was already a Heartstopper fan really knew that this was going to be huge. And that it would really blow up. Because the webcomic is really unlike any other stories that are being told. Most queer stories seem to be very tragic, or they show quite a negative perspective, and there aren't many queer stories out there with such a broad spectrum of identities in, which is what I really like about the show. I also love the fact that Elle, being a trans character, we haven't seen her before her transition. We haven't had flashbacks about horrible times she's been through. It's been very much, this is Elle, this is who she is from the start, and I really appreciate and love that. Going forward, I'd really like to see a really broad spectrum of characters on screen that are trans, especially people who have transitioned later on or are non-binary. I of course can't talk about this. But it would be really cool to see a really wide variety of trans people on screen. But I think this is just one example of how Heartstopper has opened so many doors for people. One thing I would say is the first time I watched it, I felt quite sad. And I've been talking to a few of my friends that are similar ages to me or a bit older. I'm 21, and this seems to be quite a common thing, that people are experiencing Heartstopper as quite a bittersweet, melancholic viewing experience. And at first, I was worried that that was just me. Heartstopper is undoubtedly a wonderful thing. It is such a lovely, happy, heartwarming story, and I think the young queers of today, and even people who don't identify as queer, need to have access to happy queer stories. As much as I absolutely loved It's a Sin by Russell T Davies, it was heartbreaking. I finished that show and I just had tears running down my face. It made me feel angry. It made me feel disgusted at the way the world was. And I think that queer teens and young queer people need to be able to envisage happy futures for themselves and a happy existence. But there is a flip side to this, that Heartstopper is a very rose-tinted view of life as a queer person, but also a very rose-tinted view of teen relationships. Initially, I was worried that I was the only person that felt like this, but I recently read an interview with Yasmin Finney where she described Heartstopper as a fantasy, and I thought that was a really good way to describe it. It kind of is this bubblegum sweet, fluffy depiction of what a relationship could be like for teens. And I think a lot of queer teenagers and older people maybe feel a bit jealous and a bit bittersweet seeing Nick and Charlie's relationship. Without getting into it too much, I personally had a very hard time at school. I hated school. I was really happy to leave, and I never had that network of friends that Nick and Charlie have. I also never had a relationship as a teenager. I think just down to the year groups I was in, there were never people I really gelled with, and it wasn't until I got to university that I realised that wasn't a me problem. I'd always assumed that it was something wrong with me, but it was just that I hadn't found my people yet. And I think for people who manage to find a group and even a relationship within a high school setting, that is fantastic. But I don't think it's necessarily the norm, and I don't think you should feel that you're missing out if you haven't had the Heartstopper experience. I guess when I finished the programme, I kind of felt a little bit in mourning for what could have been. I personally don't know my sexuality. I wouldn't like to put a label on it. In my view, it's got to be about the individual person. And how could I possibly put a label saying I only like boys or I only like girls when I haven't met that individual yet? That's the view that I personally have. Interestingly, over the weekend, I went to see Cock, which is a play by Mike Bartlett. I was only able to go and see it because I'd had a refunded voucher for something else because the tickets are so expensive. I think we need to have a whole other video about making theatre accessible to people. But anyway, watching Cock in the middle of watching Heartstopper was really interesting because Cock is a story about a man called John who has had a relationship with a man and then has a relationship with a woman, and everyone is really, really keen to put him in a box. And there's this part of the play where he talks about when he came out as gay, people told him that they were finally seeing the real him, and it almost changed even how he walked, how he spoke, his character. And I think that's really interesting, how we have this idea to kind of stereotype people. Even Nick, people assume that he's straight based on the activities that he does, the way that he speaks, the way that he dresses. Even people within Charlie's group who are really open to sexualities and spectrums. And I found that really interesting. I watched Rowan Ellis's video essay about Heartstopper, which I'd highly recommend. I'll definitely link it. And she talks about how we're kind of on this tipping point of whether we should be letting go of labels or whether we should be celebrating labels. And I think, based on my personal experience and having watched Heartstopper, I'd say it's all about personal choice. Like, Charlie is very proud to be gay. Nick initially thinks he's straight, but then takes comfort in finding that he's bisexual, and he sees it as a celebration. Tara and Darcy, on the other hand, are really interesting because while one of them is really comfortable in her sexuality, Tara finds it much harder to call herself a lesbian. And I thought it was fantastic to just see all of this playing out and being discussed on screen very openly and without any sort of tragic backstory. I do appreciate the fact that it wasn't all entirely saccharine sweet, and we did see the harder struggles on the other side. I loved the development of Ben's character. I thought that was fantastic. I thought that Sebastian Croft did an absolutely fantastic job of playing him because he's got so many layers to him, and he obviously projects his insecurities onto Charlie and onto other people. I just thought it was a really interesting character study. I kind of hope that if we get future series, we get to see a little bit more of his story. I understand that we might want to leave him behind because as a character, Ben has had a very negative effect on Charlie, but I would like to see him find happiness as well and also come to terms with his own identity. I do think there's a distinction between sexuality and identity, and I don't think we should be always pairing the two together. And that's one of the things I loved about Heartstopper, that traditionally in media, bi characters are often seen as villains, and we see that in Ben, but then we also have Nick, who is a very positive character, and in that sense, they're not being defined by their sexuality and instead have many more layers to them. I also really appreciated the absence of sex scenes, and that might be a weird thing to say, but like, It's a Sin, for example, very in your face about the sex scenes, and that definitely has a place and is really groundbreaking and exciting to see on screen. But I do think for younger people and teens, and especially ace people, it's quite nice to have a story that isn't 100% focused on sex. And I think the real overall focus of Heartstopper is the importance of friendships. You know, all of these fantastic relationships are built on solid friendships first. And it's more gentle and respectful and kind of slow. And it shows that sometimes it's okay for things not to move really, really fast. I also appreciated the fact that the actors were playing their own age in most instances. And also the fact that because they were so young, they weren't sexualised, which I think is quite important. I think it's also worth noting that a relationship like Nick and Charlie's, when they're so young, was written about by Alice because it's quite remarkable. What I mean by that is, it's always noted in Solitaire and in Alice's other books that Nick and Charlie have something really special, and so I don't think anyone should beat themselves up if they haven't achieved Nick and Charlie's relationship when they're 15 and 17. I think that's pretty unusual. But it is really lovely to have that model of what a really wonderful relationship could be. I love that Charlie is constantly supportive of Nick, even though Nick wants to take his time, but that also we've got that contrast between Charlie and Ben's relationship and Charlie and Nick's relationship, because Nick always remains affectionate and friendly towards Charlie, even in public settings, and it's just more about him wanting a bit more time to figure everything out and telling people one by one. And I think that's really lovely. I recently reread Drama by Raina Telgemeier, which was one of my favourites growing up. I loved Raina Telgemeier's graphic novels, and it really hasn't aged well in comparison to something like Heartstopper. There's this scene where this straight character finds out that one of their friends is gay, and their friend goes, "I'm gay, you can say it," and then she kind of blushes, and then at the end she goes, "Your secret's safe with me," even though he hadn't shown any sort of shame or expressed wanting to keep anything a secret. And I think it's time to maybe let that kind of media go. Of course, we need to acknowledge that coming out is still quite a big thing for people, even if a lot of people are leaving that concept behind. But I think it's really lovely that we're being presented with this utopic kind of ideal of a world without shame for young queer people. And even though that may be a fantasy, it is a possibility and it is something that we can strive for. And I'm so excited to see a future where there's loads of stories like Heartstopper, exploring all different sexualities and identities and stories, because it's kind of weird that it's so groundbreaking. I would love to see some ace stories being made. I've heard that if there's a second series, there's the possibility of Isaac being asexual or aromantic. I'd love to see a Loveless adaptation. I think so much of Alice's work begs to be put on a screen, especially now that she's shown what a fantastic screenwriter she is. That's all the thoughts that I have at the moment. I personally still do feel a little bit bittersweet about it, and I can't quite let go of that feeling that I wish I had had a Nick and Charlie experience and that group of friends and a lovely support network around me. But first and foremost, this is such a positive move in storytelling and really exciting. And I'm so happy to think of all of the people growing up with this and being exposed to this. Even cis straight people watching it, I think it's a really important moment in television and in storytelling. That's all I can think to say at the moment. I'm still kind of working through my feelings, working through everything I'm thinking in my head about it. Let me know if you have a favourite Alice Oseman work, when you discovered her work, any thoughts that you have. Also, hopefully I've finished my drawing. Please don't be too harsh on me. I'm aware that my drawings are kind of childish and fun and not 100% anatomically correct. But the point is, I really enjoy the process. I really enjoy drawing. It's one of those rare things where I absolutely lose track of time and space when I'm drawing. I just enter another zone and it's a really nice experience for me. Let me know if you'd like any more Draw With Me videos as well and what you thought of this format. I'd love to make some more. Also, let me know if you've created any Heartstopper art. If you want to connect with me on Instagram, I'm Anna Talks Videos, and you can see more of my artwork on there. I'll also link down to my website if you'd like to see some more. If you enjoyed this video, you can give it a like, and you can also hit subscribe, but only if you fancy. I hope you have a lovely week. Thank you so much if you got this far, and I'll see you next time. Bye!